Hi, how's it going? Y'all hear me okay? Y'all hear me okay? Yeah. All right. So this is a talk. It's called How to Be a Great Developer. I know we don't have a lot of time. I guess we're going over to Staten Island and we're going to see like some kind of Queensryche cover band. Anybody? Anybody? All right. Empire, it's their album. Fuck it. All right. So yeah, and my name is Ed Finkler. I'm a head developer culture. They said all that crap already. So I'm going to kind of try to bust through this a little bit here so we don't get shot. And I want you to remember that this set of slides, now I used to be a designer in a different life until eventually the demands of the internet caught up with my skills and far surpassed them. But this is a text adventure. This is, there's a lot of cool people who make cool slides, all visual and fancy and shit like that here. That is not going to happen. If you do not want to listen to me, you can simply read along. It's that kind of a situation. It's accessible to both people who like to read or listen to somebody chatter a bunch. So that's what I'm dealing with right now. So why do you want to listen to me? Like the brother said right before here. Why do you want to listen to me? Well, because I've been doing this for like 20 years. I remember when it was cool to have tiled backgrounds and graphics. Tiled backgrounds. Kicked ass. Kicked ass, my friend. The first web browser I used was Mosaic on HP UX, and it could not display GIFs. And I pronounced it with a hard G because that's what you do. Somebody sitting around there writing Unix commands being like, what's a GIF? Nobody said that shit. That's peanut butter. All right. Anyway, I'm getting off a tangent here. Getting on a tangent. All right, so I've been a lone wolf a lot. Like lone wolf, that kind of thing where it's like you do everything. Well, I did that a bunch because that was kind of what you did back then. And I also been on teams like past 5 years, been a lot more team stuff. I've been remote for the last 5 years, and I worked in offices a bunch. And I've done stuff for Cash Money and academia. I've done a bunch of that. I worked for academia for about 10 years and then bounced on the sides between money making. And I do a lot of PHP, I do a lot of Python, I do a lot of JS, I do a lot of DevOps and stuff like that. I don't know if anybody ever heard of it. You remember how Adobe Air, you were supposed to be able to write apps in JS, HTML, and CSS as long as Flash? Does anybody here remember that? Well, I do because I was one of the first people who did something like that. I did a microblogging, a Twitter client called Spaz. I won an award from Adobe for it. I got a Mac Pro with 8-core Xeon. It was awesome, and that computer is still in my house and still serving up Voopy files. That's all it does right now. That's all it does. So I have frequently been called a webmaster. Because that's what people called you back then. Up until like 2010, my title was Webmaster. Because that is how academia moves. Slowly. Now I'm going to make an assertion. Tech skills are overrated. Way overrated. Like super overrated. Like the whole hiring system for tech jobs is totally screwed up overrated. It's not that they don't matter. A certain level of competency is very important, and more experience doing this kind of stuff does matter. But I think they're wildly overrated. In fact, I'd argue, and that's kind of the whole point, I am arguing this, that the things I'm going to talk about here are more important than tech skills. I've seen a lot of technically accomplished folks, real technically accomplished folks, far more than me, who, in my estimation, were poor developers because they wouldn't practice these things. They never got to it. They always resisted. So there's there's 5 major principles I think make for a great developer. And the first one is practicing empathy. And I think that's the core one, and everything really kind of leads from that. Practicing humility. Always be learning, not always be closing, always be learning. Avoid tribalism and bettering your community. That's going to make everybody feel real good after we talked about that. Practicing empathy. Everything flows from empathy. Everything flows from empathy. Empathy, to be clear, because sometimes people get it confused with sympathy or feeling bad for people or something like that. Empathy is the ability to understand how a person feels and why they may feel that way. And empathy is your most important skill, period. That's it. You can do that, you're going to be a hell of a lot better at any job you want to do, particularly a developer. Everything flows from empathy. You practice it with everyone you interact with, and everyone who interacts with the things that you make. And while you're doing that, there's really two groups I think you want to keep in mind. While we're doing this developer geek stuff that we do, you always keep two groups in mind. First, the users. Second, the rest of your team, the people who are going to interact with your stuff. And that team, let's say we're talking about an open source project, that could be a lot of people maybe you don't really know, but who might be interacting with it. So it's these two groups of people who are going to be impacted by the work that you do. So regarding users, the point is to solve the user's problems, not your problems. Inasmuch as solving your problems serves the first thing, that's cool. If it doesn't matter. It does not matter. The point is to make things that people use. And you need to figure out what the problems are, and you have to empathize with them to do that. This isn't about you. When we're figuring out the best ways to do things, when we're figuring out how to structure our projects, how to structure our code, what technologies to use, what approaches we should take, the point is not to make your job easier. The point is to solve the user's problems. Again, if you're doing something that serves that, great. If it doesn't, you're on the wrong path. Now for teammates, or other, you might call them colleagues, people who are going to interact with, people you work on the project with, you have to make choices with those folks in mind, those colleagues in mind. You always got to be thinking about that. Because the likelihood that you're the only person who's ever going to interact with the code that you're pushing out is really low. Now, obviously, there's fun projects you mess around with. Look, I write scripts. I write other things that I'm just kind of dicking around with or I just use for my own purposes. That is fine. But the vast majority of stuff in terms of what we do professionally, that stuff a lot of other people touch. And a lot of other people are impacted based on the choices that we make. So you have to anticipate their questions and potential confusion that might come up. Wait, why did he choose this? Why did she do it like this? How many times do we as developers, because we're kind of dickheads like this, always want to say, I don't understand the way he did it, so I just want to rewrite it all. Like all the time, that's like our natural reaction to things because it's strange and weird. Right? And that's the kind of the flip side of it. First, we got to anticipate that's going to happen, and we got to try to anticipate that and explain, justify, give some kind of understanding to that. So that might be documentation, that might be having a conversation with somebody else on your team, why I'm making these decisions, things of that nature. The flip side of course, is if you're not in the room, you shouldn't just assume you know why something happened the way it did, because you probably don't. And I think you got to think weeks and months and years ahead. And I think this is the thing that I see people screw up the most. Working in academia or working in a number of different fields where you don't have turnover, where you don't take a new job every year necessarily. I worked at Purdue University for almost 10 years at one position. Before that, I worked at a company for 4 years. And I started to see people who were changing jobs all the time, and I couldn't figure out, it was just strange. The pacing was so different. The fact is that outside of a very quick-paced sort of startup culture, things don't iterate as fast as we think. I remember one time coming in, and this was when I was at Purdue. I worked for a security research center, and I did all their web stuff, but I also did some security audits of web-based stuff that we kind of did for clients. They would basically pay my time to do it. And we had a project. This was I think it was a government-funded project. Had to do with, I don't know, bugs in agriculture, crap like that, right? I don't know, bugs eating plants. It was some kind of stuff like that. Anyway, so they had a web server running that they were running their website on, and it was running on a VAX machine. This was in 2009. Now, first off, that was a dumb idea because there were known security holes in it that they hadn't patched. However, we wildly underestimate how long our code's going to be out there, and the support problems and the confusion that comes with trying to support things where, oh yeah, I'll just bring in this library. Okay, I'm trying not to go on a JS rant here. Do you guys do semantic versioning? And if you do, how many times do you wait until 1.0 to actually use something? And does 1.0 mean anything to you? Because what that means is now I can trust it. Maybe I can put it in production. The API is supposed to be frozen, right? But we get all the time we bring in stuff. I do it too. When I'm writing JS stuff, I'm bringing in stuff that maybe not core libraries. I do a lot of Vue.js stuff lately. That stuff finally got to 1.0. Great, I started using it. Now they're talking about 2.0. Jesus fucking Christ, I just got this one. Anyway, but the point is, stuff changes really fast. Is the documentation going to be around in 5 years? Or are they going to delete it all? I remember what with like Bootstrap 2, when they switched from 2 to 3, they just like, after a pretty quick amount of time, they just like deleted the Bootstrap 2 docs. After it had been deployed to like tens or hundreds of thousands of websites. What are you doing? Like, it's that kind of thinking. It's that kind of thinking about how, you know, what are these, how's this going to affect people, and how long are these things going to be around? So, again, and this is a big thing for me, thinking about documentation, thinking about the ways that people interact with stuff. And a big thing, this is a pet peeve of mine, is empathy for people who read your documentation. Because a lot of people, man, we put a lot of time and marketing into making people use our fancy little JS libraries and shit like that. And they get very, you know, real pumped up because we want to organize conferences around it and have all sorts of stuff and build an empire and all that. Hey! So, don't assume people know what you know, because they probably don't. We make so many assumptions about the universality of our knowledge, and it is a false assumption. It is almost always incorrect. This is, and I decided not to use a JS project, but I wanted something that was maybe a little confusing. Does anybody know what this is? Like what this block of code is? Anybody, raise your hand. It's XML. There's a few people who know it's Maven because you probably have been tasked with writing Java in the past. Does anybody know what this stuff is underneath it? Yeah, it's Gremlin code. Gremlin is a DSL for querying graph databases, right? Okay, so Gremlin's really common. This is for a database system called Titan. It's a graph database that uses Gremlin. It's written in Java. It does not mention any of this on the front page. It does not say this is for Java developers. It does not say you need to know Gremlin how to do this. This is their quick start. What the hell am I supposed to do with this? I feel like a jackass looking at this thing. I don't know what to do. And so, I mean, this makes the Webpack documentation, I don't know, look like Socrates. Of course, that was passed down oral tradition. It was then written down later, but you know. A quick start is supposed to be going about from 0 to 15 miles per hour, not from 70 to 100, right? This is, and I see a lot of JS tool quick starts look like this, even to experienced developers like me. I've been doing this a long time. This stuff is crazy what you people are doing. It's crazy. Your tool chains are huge. They're like the pain box in Pinhead, Hellraiser. They're like that. It is crazy. Man, what are you people doing? I don't know. Humility. Humility goes hand in hand with empathy. Know that you will always be learning and improving. You'll always be learning and improving. You've got to accept and own up to your mistakes. See this all the time where I see kind of hostile work environments. A lot of people don't like to do this because they're scared. The less you fear being wrong, though, the more confident you can be. Because being wrong there's nothing wrong with it. That doesn't mean that there's some kind of, you know, moral, you know, problem with you. It doesn't mean there's some kind of issue. The fact is, you're wrong about many things, probably most things. We all are. I know a lot, like if you talk about the whole source of human knowledge, stuff I actually know about and can actually be sure about is like that. It is nothing. I don't, realistically, do I know, why stars explode? Do they actually explode? This could all be made up. I don't know. I just trust that somebody who looks into it isn't lying to me. I don't know. I guess it makes sense, but okay, that's fine. Everybody else is exactly the same. We know very little about most things. And you have to embrace that. You always have to be learning and always questioning and always adapting and growing. Everybody is like that. Everybody is wrong about most things. And it's important to allow others to practice that humility. In many environments, there's a lot of people who they're afraid to say they don't know. There's a lot of workplaces where people are afraid to say they don't know. And sometimes they get the attitude of, well, you got to kind of toughen up. Well, no, don't tell people to toughen up. Stop being an asshole. So you always got to be learning. You always got to be learning. That goes along with it. You got to accept, first off, I probably don't know what the hell I'm talking about most things. I know a small set of stuff. It seems to work. That doesn't, that's the best you know. And I think it's important to be very liberal in learning new things and learning new approaches. But it's also very important to be conservative about using them. I love and find fascinating a lot of the stuff that is, say, involved in and this might, some people, you got to judge whether you could use it or not. I don't buy into a lot of major modularization systems, ES6 stuff, things like that, because it introduces a huge amount of complexity that wasn't there before, right? So I'm very conservative about using that stuff, and that can apply to anything. Why you don't adopt new versions of things right away. Why I try very hard to avoid adopting things that haven't hit 1.0. That eliminates a large swath of technologies and frameworks that seem kind of exciting to me. But I won't put them in production. I might goof around with them, but I'm sure it's not going to potentially endanger the livelihoods or weekends of my teammates by doing stuff like that, right? Now, any technology can be the right choice, depending on the needs of the project and the strengths of the team. Those are two things you have to listen to. First off, what stuff are we doing? Secondly, what strengths do we already have? If we have been building a bunch of stuff on Python, and what we have are a bunch of good Python developers, switching your server backend to Node may or may not be a great idea. Now, if what you've got are a bunch of people who are really good with JavaScript and already have that experience with it, maybe it's a good choice for you. You guys got to figure that out for yourselves. But you got to think about that stuff and not try to ram things down people's throats. You end up spinning your wheels and spending a lot more time on stuff than you need to be. There are 10 different ways to skin the web cat, at least. All right? The dramatic differences between one to the other are minimal. So pick the ones that work for you with what you're trying to do and who you're trying to do it with. I think it's really important you set aside a little time each week to learn about some new tech. I just subscribe to a couple of those weekly newsletters. It brings up cool stuff I can explore, learn about, things like that. A lot of that stuff I never actually bring into production, but I think it's good to know about them, right? And if you do go to conferences, hey, if you go to conferences, try to catch a couple talks about technology, because a lot of them aren't single track like this, if you haven't been to a lot of them. Try to catch talks about technology you have no experience with. It helps, maybe I would like to see what's going on in the assembler world, something like that. You learn a lot from that kind of stuff. Sometimes it's kind of like, oh, boy, I'm glad I'm not in that world, but, right. So avoiding tribalism, I think a key thing. You got to just refuse to participate in it. And we are social animals, and being part of a group gives us confidence. But warring over technology choices, that distracts us from doing good work and practicing empathy. We want to build communities with what we have in common and embrace diversity. We help people feel safe. They can be part of that community too. Make these communities safe places for anyone who's interested in participating. And I see this all the time, and this is such a pet peeve of mine. It grinds my gears. View absolute statements with extreme skepticism. Whenever I see something that's like, this will absolutely make your code a joy to use, that is what you know the term code smells? This is a code smell for language, and it smells like bullshit. Okay? Anybody who says it's the best or it's the worst without saying, in this particular situation, in my experience, and these were my experiences, it didn't work for me, I'm real suspicious of anybody who says those kinds of, because they don't sound very experienced to me. It doesn't sound like they know what they're talking about. Because I've known where I've seen stuff that worked great in one situation and was a burning garbage dump in another one. And it was the same stuff. Dismissing technology, any technology that you might use for doing your development work without a sound, reasonable argument is lazy and prone to error. And don't be goddamn lazy about stuff, okay? This is our job. We're supposed to be engineers in this stuff, right? Put the time in. And you got to be really careful about participating X versus Y arguments. And that is just a huge amount. It's like, if you just look up, like I just looked up Webpack because I was going to see, can I make fun of their docs? I was looking at that before this, and actually it's okay. It's just when you get past the docs and then it turns into like some kind of like 30-armed death crab that like can't. Jesus Christ. And the second thing is, the first thing is like your official Webpack stuff. Second thing is Webpack versus Browserify. You know what? I don't give a shit. Just use one. Who cares? Just use one. Pick it. Do it. Right? I don't know. Do a little bit of work on it. But realistically, I don't think it's worth your time. And it's certainly not worth your time spending a bunch of time trying to convince somebody else they shouldn't be doing it. It is just not worth your time. I'm a musician on and off, and I used to do more than that. More of it. And when I was doing that more often, and I still do, I ran into tons of people who had kick-ass gear, had spent tens of thousands of dollars on synths and guitars and recording equipment and ADATs, you can tell when I was doing this stuff, and stuff like that, right? And they love to argue about equipment, but they barely ever finish a damn song. I see that all the time, and it's the same kind of shit I see here. The only things that deserve your loyalty are people. Not brands, and not companies, and sure as hell not technologies. People are the only things that deserve your loyalty. Yeah. If you're interested in solving problems, each tech is a tool, and some tools may work better for you or others, things like that. But that is but you should have no loyalty to the tools you use. They're just tools, man. Fashion-driven development doesn't work and bites you in the ass. Every time. Every time. Now, about bettering your community, I know I'm taking a little bit of time. I don't want to graduate, we'll get this wrapped up quick. But bettering your community, I think, is an essential part of being a great developer. You make people's lives better with your skills. We can do that. And I don't think you need to worry about how many people use the stuff that you make necessarily. I think empowering 5 people is incredibly special. When I worked in small groups, and I worked in an office and I built internal tools, we used to call them intranets back then. I made their lives better because I made them able to do something that maybe took them like 2 or 3 hours, and it could take like 5 or 6 minutes. Technology is that force multiplier, right? Doesn't solve problems for you, but if you could figure it out, use that intent, force multiply, you can do stuff way faster with it. And that's really, really special when you can do that for folks. And they'll remember what you did for them. They'll always remember that. And you got to work, I really feel like you've got to work to make that community around you better. Use those skills that you have. You do not need to go to some magic city of tech genius to do important work. You just don't. I live in Indiana. There is no magic city of tech genius in Indiana. You know what? I'm glad there isn't. I feel like I can have a real big impact because the people who live there need the kind of skills I have and that you folks have just as much as everybody else. And I'd rather be doing a lot of the stuff that I'm doing than trying to figure out how to sell some more ads to somebody. Hey, I'm just saying, I don't know, that's what I want to do. That's cool. That's what you want to do. That's fine. It doesn't matter where you are, though. What matters is the difference you make in people's lives. Even if you got a job that maybe you're like, oh, maybe this doesn't make change in the world or something like that. You make a huge difference in people's lives in the way that you interact with them on an everyday basis. And this is the internet, so the people around you could be all over the world. They could be anywhere. So I think you share what you learn with the people around you. You ask them to share what they've learned with you. You find people doing stuff like you and share with them. And that could be talks, that could be blogging, that could be screencasts. Do people still blog anymore? I don't know, is that a thing? It could just be a conversation you have with somebody you know. And this can be actually extremely helpful career-wise. And my career is very unintentionally benefited massively from this. Not intentionally at all. And there's some question about this. I've had this come up before about, well, what about that environment that you're in, and how's that set with supervisors and things like that? And one of the things is that values of any kind of hierarchical organization are established from the top down, right? And great developers need a great org to support them. How many people here are like a team lead, supervisor, something like that? I can kind of see. So there's a number of you out here. Your job, I believe, is to support and empower the people that you supervise. And your job you're not more important than they are. You just have a different job. You just do something a little bit different, right? A lot of the people that you lead and a lot of people that you work with are scared or they're burned out and they're struggling. Statistics say that just talk about the general population, about 20% of the people in the general population at a given time are dealing with some kind of mental health disorder at any given time. It's important that you promote mental wellness, and that's a personal interest of mine. In all of this, listen, understand, help, and empower the people that you work with. And they're going to be able to do a much better job, much more powerful job. They're going to be much more productive. They're going to appreciate the kind of work that you do. Even if you say occasionally stupid things like, well, your job sucks because you sell ads. I'm sorry about that. Sometimes I say things and I don't think about it a little bit, but I think it's very important that you listen, you try to understand, you help people, and you try to empower them. Now, we all have that ability to do that, but people who are in supervisory positions have special responsibility, I think, to do that kind of stuff because they have an enormous impact on the quality of life of the folks who work for them and work with them. Now, there's an organization I set up. I'll just mention this in passing. It's called OSMI Help. OSMI, Open Sourcing Mental Illness, osmihelp.org. We do a lot of work, including we've developed handbooks to try to create workplaces that are supportive of mental wellness and things like that. And I think this is a key aspect that feeds into all of these things we're talking about today about how to have great developers. Well, that's another talk for another time, but that's what I got here today. So I got a little Q&A time, I guess. Here, we're going to sit down, and that's me. And the slides are up there if you want to get those slides, or if you just want to yell at me or something like that. That's totally cool. And the font I used here was this, so there you go.
Woo! Welcome, welcome. I was going to say that someone misled you about the maximum resolution of the projector, but
I was just keeping it real, dog. Just keeping it real.
I thought that was really interesting to listen to, and like it struck a lot of different chords with me. One thing that I kind of wanted to ask is like, so why? I feel like I hear a lot of talks about how important it is to be empathetic and all these things. How come software development seems to attract so many people to whom this is news?
Yeah. I think it's a good question. I'm not 100% sure because it's anecdotally. We don't have good research about that, and it kind of dovetails with the other stuff that I do. Why does it attract folks like that? I think anecdotally, and I think my suspicion is that it can tend to attract folks who maybe work on their own a little bit better, who are comfortable with doing that kind of thing. The second thing, though, is I think that there's an issue with the way that you're taught to think as a developer is that there's a set, you have a problem and there's a set sort of way that you can put together your logic and configure things to fix that problem, and and it's because it's such a controlled set and a small set of stuff. I'm using horrible words that make no sense. Set. You mean anything. But the point is that it's a solvable problem and a repeatable problem, right? Human behavior and the reasons why we do the things that we do. I think as developers, our tendency is to apply the way we think about solving other problems to that problem. And that, unfortunately, is not applicable because it is a far more complex issue. And I think it's important to keep that in mind when we're talking about these kinds of things. So I think that's a tendency of it. I think there's a tendency to feel like everything is solvable with an algorithm that I can figure out as a human being. And I don't think that's actually true.
Yeah, one of the assumptions people make is that like the more time you put into something, the better it's going to be for the world. And one of the things that I've been thinking about, and was thinking about while you were talking, is sometimes things like helping people do their first pull request or so on and so forth. Those things might not take that long, but if you can think about it as you're opening up another web worker, like a literal web worker, when you have that type of impact on someone, and even if you, and the other thing is, I think we're all really enmeshed in this tech community, and we forget how impactful the tech skills we have can be if you apply them to other areas. I don't know if it could be your like farm share or local homeless shelter or things like that, where your tech skills can be more impactful than if you're just sharing them with other people who have tech skills.
Oh, that's absolutely true. I mean, I've done a little bit of work like that, and I could do a lot more for sure. But the experience that I've had in working with nonprofits who have poor IT support is that they are incredibly grateful, and they are in great need of people who have skills like ours. And the stuff that they need us to do is really, really easy. So, and I think that can have a huge impact. I think that stuff is absolutely part of what makes your community better. And I think we have a responsibility to do that because we exist inside these communities, and I think we have a responsibility to better them to the extent that we can and in the ways that we can.
So I think I learned from your talk that in this particular situation, in my experience, it was great.
Well, that's very nice. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Edward.